Oh, that microphone, sorry.
You're right.
Hello and welcome back. For those of you who have been away for some time, I'd like to really welcome you back at this time of year. And thanks for tuning in. Today really I want to invite you into a conversation really about relationships, in fact. And we're talking today to a couple of ladies who really are on an incredible journey in the area of practical reconciliation, but really more importantly, the strengthening of relationships. And so I say this to start with because for me personally, I think if we look out in the world and in life, relationships are fundamental to life. You know, relationships are fundamental to what happens when we go to work. They're fundamental to our family. They're fundamental to the way that we live and we work and we lead. So today I really invite you to, grab yourself a cup of tea, sit back. If you're in the car, please be safe. And but really today I invite you to take a look at what difference today's conversation could make to you in the area of relationships. More specifically, so today I have with me Carla Rogers and Aunty Munya Andrews, who are two women who have united as allies, specifically working in the area of strengthening relationships for all Australians, working with, supporting and living to support First Nations people. So while we are going to talk specifically about their journey and their mission, the work that they're doing, I do also want to acknowledge that even as I've looked at this for myself, as for many of you know, I'm a descendant of the stolen generations. My lineage and my family from the Waka Waka regions and the Kalali. And I do want to use this as, do want to mention at this time the acknowledgement of country and to any traditional owners and custodians of the land, and to pay my respects to our elders who are past, present. It is, firstly, I think for those of you who don't have a cultural background or a background where you know people who are from a First Nations, I do understand that sometimes there's a little nervousness. We get nervous about what do I say and what's appropriate, what's not appropriate, how do I introduce myself? And so today, there's certain things like that we are going to answer as well, so that you can develop your allyship with First Nations people and also to feel a little bit more confident. But I say this right up front because I think to an extraordinary philosophy of both Carla and Aunty Munya is they have this philosophy called ask us anything. And I think that's a really great philosophy, because if we think in life, the easy answer to solving any doubt is to ask the question. So thank you. Firstly, I want to thank you and welcome Aunty Munya. I'd like to, give you the opportunity to also welcome and acknowledge your local country as well.
So Nungamaladi Amba, Nungamaladi Uran, Nungamaladi Amburini Boro. Nungamaladi is hello in my language, Bardi. We say hello to all the traditional owners all over. Nungamaladi Amburini Boro, to say hello and acknowledge people's countries. And we say a special hello also to any Indigenous people that are listening to the broadcast as well. So podcast. So Nungamaladi, everybody.
Thank you. And I am really interested in talking with both of you. And Carla, I'll also get you to introduce yourself. And maybe what we'll even do, Carla, is get you to introduce you how your relationship with Aunty Munya got started.
Yeah, so it's Nungamaladi or Numbi Jodi in the local Wadi language here. And well, that's quite a story. So I started a company some time ago called Evolve, and Aunty Munya joined a project back 11 years ago now in 2011. And the project was helping, we're working in some very remote Aboriginal communities in the Gulf of Carpentaria, and we were helping those communities to have the hard yarns, so hard yarns about suicide and violence and alcohol, and so it was really tough, and we were there mentoring and supporting people, and Aunty Munya was a key team member. But pretty quickly we realised, Aunty Munya, that we shared similar values. We both believed that everyone has wisdom to offer. We look at what unites us as humans in common, what we share, the values we share, and then we also celebrate what is so amazing about our First Nations peoples and culture and wisdom. And Aunty Munya, we realised we had a similar passion, didn't we?
Yeah, we did, and that's really to create a more kinder, more inclusive Australia. So we got chatting about that and how do we do that? Yeah.
Yeah.
And so our goal now is to inspire 10 million allies right across Australia. So
so because we stepped back and we thought, well, how are we going to do this? You know, they're pretty big words, kinder, more inclusive Australia, and we realised it was through educating people like myself who aren't Indigenous to be more confident. As you say, a lot of people like myself were, you know, nervous and frightened or saying of doing the wrong thing, but really want to help. So that's where we develop these tools to help. But to go back even further, Kylie, I remember distinctly as, you know, like a 4-year-old kid just wandering through the bush and just talking, you know, I was a bit of an odd kid, like talking to the old people in the bush there, but thinking, but why don't I see Aboriginal kids at my school? Why aren't we taught about Aboriginal kids? Why aren't they on TV? So really noticing that absence and craving for a connection. So that's really where I started with my journey. And Aunty Munya, you started a little bit differently, didn't you?
Well, yeah, just sure. Just growing up in the Kimberley region of Western Australia, and you know, I remember sitting on the steps of my school, looking out on the marshland, and wondered what lay beyond, and thinking about the other 3/4 of Australians, but always from a young age, being interested in other people, in other cultures, in other languages, which led to my journey where I am today. So.
A couple of things that I'm really moved by. Number one, firstly, Carla, what you were saying about what you noticed as a kid walking through the bush, and I, you know, in some aspects, one of the things that I think is absolutely become obvious actually is the more and more I talk with people, the more and more I realize that inherently we are very alike as human beings. And when you say that journey for you, you know, whilst I can't confess obviously to being in the bush and having the same experience, you know, I am reminded a lot about that view that children come into the world with. You know, we don't come into the world with the, you know, the differentials between, you know, black and white. We're like, well, why wouldn't that be the case? That just seems like a normal thing to ask questions about, right?
Yeah, that's right. No, we talk about, when we're teaching people, we talk about terra nullius, you know, the English declaring Australia as terra nullius, land belonging to nobody. And I talk about terra nullius of my schooling in the 70s and 80s. And I tell a story that I have, that I remember, or something that happened that I remember, was being on the steps of I went to a Catholic primary school, and steps of the church in the choir. And I was so excited because they said we're going to sing a song about Aboriginal children. And so, and I still remember the smell of those old, photostated sheets or whatever, you know, and of the words in front of me, and pictures of little Aboriginal babies, I thought. But anyway, the song turned out to be 5 Little Pickaninnies. And pickaninnies is actually a racial slur from North America. So not only was it a racial slur, but also it was misappropriated from somewhere else anyway. But for me, that's, again, you know, I was probably 8 or 9 then. But that absence and that desire to know more. And we find that a lot, don't we, with people that we work with. People come to us with a real hunger to know more, and still, even at this stage, even younger people say it's improved a little, but want to know a lot more. And you know, it was only 2018 that in New South Wales, Ancient Australia was introduced into the HSC. So we're only talking less than 4 years ago.
Wow. The other thing that I'm also now curious about, which, you know, is obviously very, I won't say unique in a way, but I think your allyship, you know, you've mentioned the word allies and how you're together. And I think it's really, firstly, very inspiring. because I think what it communicates to the world is your commitment to try to create solutions that allow people to be able to move forward in a way. So can you share with us a little bit about, your creation and your commitment with allyship and allies?
Yeah, yes. It's actually, Auntie, when we started teaching this model, and we came up with these, what we call the 7 steps, and they're the tools for people to increase their confidence to be an ally. And it was actually Aunty Munya that was really, this is a long time ago, was very focused on allyship. So like well ahead of your time, Aunty Munya. But the reason for it, the focus is, in Australia, only 3% of the population is Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander. Or if we're in a room of 30 people, only one of those people is statistically going to be an Aunty Munya. So the reason we need allies, and I'll take it to Aunty Munya in a moment, but is that we can't leave everything up to the Aunty Munyas. I mean, there's such a small percentage of the population already overwhelmed and overburdened. So that's why we've provided all these tools, Kylie, for people to, so that for me as a non-Indigenous person, the responsibility is on me to find out as much as I can, to educate myself as much as I can, rather than just keep going to an Aboriginal person saying, wanting something from them. But how do you find that, Aunty Munya, the allyship model?
No, I think what attracted me to the allyship model is that idea that you don't have to do it on your own, because that's when you can feel overwhelmed as an individual, thinking, oh my God, where do I even start to tackle this or that? But with allies, you've got more minds and people to contribute to working out a solution to these issues and problems, and taking on that burden, as Carla said. So that's what attracted me to it. But also, when I first learned about allyship, and it was through some friends of mine who would often come home saying, oh, so-and-so is such a good ally, this one's an ally. And I said, hang on, what are you talking about? What's this ally business? And they said, someone who stands up for a mob. So immediately my ears picked up, and I went, what? Yeah, someone who speaks up for our mob. Oh, tell me more. How I found out about it. So there's that sense of like we're all in this together, which I think gives people strength and courage to continue doing what they do. So that's what attracted me to allyship. And so really that's led to our development of our allyship programs.
Just on that, Aunty Munya, I mean, that brings me to the other point that I heard in your sharing of, your journey for yourself about when you were raised, and what occurred to you was like looking for the beyond. And I guess this is one of those areas that I suppose many people who are not got an Indigenous background would have a question about, is that from an Indigenous or First Person's perspective, that is really inherent to who we are and who you are and who the community is, right? Is that we are all one. We are one with each other. We are one with community. So there is a natural inclination or a presence or a view about the world that we are not separate, that we are one. Is that something that you could you share, I suppose, from your perspective and from the perspective of First Nations people, how that communicates?
Definitely, it fits in with kinship entirely, because it is about belonging to a group of people, but all working in partnership with each other to contribute to the greater whole. So there's that element of allyship again that really appeals to me and just feels natural. So it's all about being supported as we journey through life. And God knows we all need allies, and especially during these times that we've gone through, what struck me was a lot of the posts on social media posts and that were all about feeling lonely and disconnected. And I said to Carla, we can't have this. We can't have people talking about feeling disconnected, because it's not true. We are connected. It's about helping people realize the ways in which we're connected, that we're all family, extended family in some way or other, so that we needn't feel alone, or that we're going through, particularly, COVID on our own, that we've got all these people to fall back on and depend on. So the two are tied in very much for me. So
It's the flip side, like so Aunty Munya mentioned the sharing the burden, and also it's also sharing in the incredible strengths of Indigenous wisdom. And as Aunty Munya said, so when we go deeper and look at kinship, and most people just overwhelm, like come out with the insights of, wow, it is all about belonging, it is all about inclusion and how we're connected. And it's so, again, a lot of things we say, yes, Aboriginal wisdom, people have been doing this for up to 100,000 years. So, the buzzword now which is good, but in the diversity and inclusion space is all about belonging. And it's like, yep, that's another thing you've been doing for up to 100,000 years, but been doing really, really well. And so it's been very interesting in our journey together when I've said to Aunty Munya, I don't feel like I belong to this group, or I don't, feel quite like I belong or fit. And Aunty Munya looks at me like I'm a nutcase and says, like, how can you feel that way? Because another thing we haven't emphasized so much is that the country is family. And so what do you say to me, Aunty Munya, when I say that to you? Like,
yeah, I just go, you're on country, you belong. So, country hasn't rejected you. In fact, country includes you. So how can you feel that you don't belong? You've got all your countrymen all around, not just people, but animals and plants and trees. They're all family. So they're with you. You're not alone. So, yeah. It is all about belonging and feeling that you're part of something bigger than yourself.
I mean, just very moved, and I'm not really sure how best to say it. So I think for a very long time, I think one of the things, when you kind of feel like, and there's maybe many things that we talk about purpose. I mean, in a lot of businesses today, we talk about purpose. In life, we're talking more about purpose. And one of the things that has struck me is, being raised as, sadly, when, the backstory of my grandmother, as a stolen generation was removed from her family, and, the aftermath, I would say, about that. I know you talk in your book a little bit about also, the impact of intergenerational trauma, and stories of our past do have an impact on the disparities in our relationships today. And I can certainly see that even for myself, because we ended up being raised a particular way. We weren't raised on country. I wasn't raised educated about my background and my connection to country. So it's a very late journey for me. But one of the things that really struck me is I think then I have a good role to play, because, there was always been a connection. But the word belonging for me, there's two minds. And I'm like you, Carla, on the one hand, I have this background and this kind of being raised in an environment and culture where it really was about segregation. You kind of hung in different groups. So when I was operating in that world, I had this sense of I don't belong here a lot. But then on the flip side, something was grounding me in a sense of belonging that I did not know about. And so I often think to myself, I think belonging is a really critical thing for certainly to tap into the greatest and most, and not saying greatest, but really the wisest, the wisdom of Aboriginal culture, because as something that's fundamental to who they are. It's on the Western side, we're talking about something that's inherently missing for a lot of people. And that is very sad when we think actually we need to flip it so that we're actually tapping into this wisdom to provide perhaps the thing that's been missing for many, many years.
Yeah, there is a lot that is, we share as values between each other, but there is a lot that contrast between our different cultures and systems. And so even when we're looking at kinship more deeply, and everyone's connected and everyone's related, and it's all about bringing in and connection rather than separating, whereas in my culture, it's more about separating. So even the concept of when I talk about first cousins, second cousins, third cousins, Aunty Munya's like, what are you talking about? And you get really confused. I get confused by that as well. It's completely opposite. Like it's saying you're this far away, you're this far away, rather than everyone's close up. So it's quite interesting, and there's so much to be learned from that wisdom. you know, another thing, you know, we talked about, like, so if country is family, and everything else is family, yeah, how can you not belong to it? But also, how can you not care for it? So that's another massive thing that we can learn from in our world today.
Yeah, and that thing about family and, you know, how many degrees separated are you? Like, we don't have a hierarchy of cousins and that. You're a cousin or you're not, you know, none of this first, second, third, fourth. And it's interesting when people are, you know, explaining their indigeneity to someone, and someone will go, and how many generations is that? It's like, for our people, it's enough that you come down the line. Doesn't matter how far back that is. The fact that you come down that line, you're born of someone who originates from this country is enough. And I think Garia people, Garia is our word for non-Aboriginal people, have problems understanding that, because throughout their history, they've been so dislocated and disconnected from those ties, you know, but Indigenous people just have this sense of, you know, down the line as a common expression that's used.
Cup of tea.
Yeah, it is enough. And then, you know, and we laugh and joke about the mixed racial heritage thing, and we say, but after all, a cup of tea is still a cup of tea, no matter how much milk is added. And I say to people, well, my milk is Scottish, but for Indigenous people, that's enough. And it also just counters that feeling, Carla. We've talked about it, you know, how, like, for a lot of people, what it comes down to is just, I'm not enough. And in fact, Aboriginal culture says you are enough. Who you are is enough, and you belong, and that's good enough.
So is the belonging something that's central to, you know, your book, Practical Reconciliation, has a subtitle, the Strengthening Relationships for All Australian in seven Easy Steps. Would you say that the belonging aspect is kind of really a strong thread of that?
I would say so, definitely.
Yeah, and we do pose the question when we're working more deeply with people, you know, what happens when you see everyone as family? And, you know, for most people, it is about more compassion, more empathy, more tolerance, and, you know, all those things that we'd like to have in the world. But those 7 steps, though, we do look at a lot of things, but it is fairly systematic. So, you know, we want to make it we're super practical. And we're about to republish that book, actually, with the title Allyship for Reconciliation, because our focus is so much on allyship. So whenever we're exploring anything, Kylie, we look at, well, what does that mean for me as an ally? And we give people tips. So around the 26th of January, for example, we give lots of tips for actions you can take as an ally around that difficult day. And, you know, we look at
as a practical takeout, considering that the majority of people probably listening, so I'll take the principle of the 3% rule, that 3% of people listening will be Indigenous, then the remaining will not. As a very practical example, I think you've really nailed something there, and I'd be interested to have this shared from your perspective while we can yarn. Is on that day itself, what would you say would be a few things that you would tips that you would say for people about how they could approach that going forward?
Well, firstly is to acknowledge country. If you know, a lot of people don't know the country on where they work or live, so find out whose country you're on, and do an acknowledgement. Now, that doesn't have to be a formal thing. That could be, for me, you know, when I get inspired and I'm on my morning walk, I say, hello, old people, it's Carla. Just going through a walk on your country. Thank you for having me here. And Kylie, we say to people, it's just like going to someone's house for dinner. You know, what do? You don't just barge in. Well, we hope you don't just barge in. You know, you stop, you say, thank you for having me on your home. So find out more about your local mob and who they are. Find out more about why that day is so painful.
That's a big one, isn't it?
Learn more about history. And for that, really easy, we suggest, there's so many good movies around, so many good books. You know, a classic one, for example, is Rabbit Proof Fence. You know, I think every Australian should see Rabbit Proof Fence. learn about the connection to country and why country is different. Again, but the easiest thing to do is to firstly just find out who your local mob are and who's the name of country, and maybe hello or something in a local language. But then otherwise just immerse yourself in videos, books, art, everything. Stories, essentially. What would you say, Aunty Munya?
Yeah, and question things, question history and the narrative that's pushed on one side as opposed to the other. And why is it offensive to refer to it as Australia Day? Why might Australia be offensive to Indigenous peoples? One, it's not our name for this nation, for this country. We had our own individual terms. In the Kimberley, where I come from, Australia is known as Bandayan. It wasn't Australia. So what does it mean to go to a country, call it by a different name, make everybody speak a language that isn't there? That's what lies at the heart of the whole Australia Day controversy. It's about what was done to erase the information beforehand or what was beforehand. It's coming to terms with that. And what does it mean going forward, where we can forge a new identity together, that everyone gets to contribute to, and not, so yeah.
Yeah, it's thank you firstly for sharing those. And a couple of things that have just stood out for me that I do want to bring up. One is, and you've alluded to this a bit before, firstly, that taking an interest in understanding the backstory, I think, is absolutely, critical as a thing to get. So acknowledging your local mob, absolutely, of course, but taking an interest in then understanding the backstory for Indigenous First Nations people, I think, is a really important one. And I say this not only just to have a respect and appreciation for what has occurred and to understand where we have come from, but I'm also saying this just in terms of broader relationships, because obviously we've been talking about a number of things that are really valuable for us as human beings, regardless of our background and our culture, including things like belonging and allyships. I mean, who can't do with an ally in life, right? Exactly. And so this other part about taking an interest in understanding, I think, is also a critical thing in relationships, just period. Taking a genuine interest. And when I say that, what I'm interested in is the value of listening. I think we really, as Aussies, and I'll put my, Western hat on, we're really good at talking. Very good at talking and not always good at listening. And so I'm interested, I know that there is, listening is a real cultural value. In fact, this, I think, is another thing from an Indigenous First Nations cultural values is, the Didiri and deep listening as one thing, which is, very different, obviously, of course, to listening to what somebody else has to say. But in terms of the Didiri and deep listening and or listening, what is your, what would you share with us about that and the value that brings from a cultural perspective and the difference that it makes for this belonging?
Well, first of all, a lot of people think when you're not saying anything that there's no communication going on, but in fact there's a whole lot of communication that goes on in silence. And what's interesting, I love a play of words. People who know me know that I have a love of play of words, and an anagram of silent is listen. So the enormous wisdom of that is and Didiri is listening deeply beyond words, even to other places, and also about the unseen, unsaid things. People with mental illness. I know I've had friends who would identify as mentally ill, and one woman in particular who said to me, Munya, she said, can you imagine living in a world where there's so much that's unsaid? She says, as a mad person, she called herself mad, she said, I hear things that other people don't, the unsaid words, and that's what drives me crazy. And it's that deep listening, is to go down deep and listen to people, listen to other human beings, the cries and that people are calling out for help and wanting help, that you can communicate in lots of different ways. And Dadiri and Indigenous practices of listening offer us that ability to enter a world of largely of things that are unsaid and unstated, to give us deeper understanding. And that's what we're after, is deeper understanding of people.
It's something that we explore. So when you're talking about relationships, for our programs, when we go through the 7 steps, we go deeper. It really is a journey of self-reflection, and the skills and things that you learn can be applied across any relationship. So when we're looking at step 4, communication, we're looking at unconscious bias and cultural baggage. And part of that cultural baggage we look at is how comfortable are you with silence and around listening. And we play the Aunty Miriam Rose talking about Dadiri, and it's one of the most profound moments in the program. And we ask for people to respond how they're feeling after they've just watched a few minutes of this video, and it's like, you know, deeply calm, grounded, peaceful. And so there's so many layers to this video, and so many lessons from the practice of Dadiri. And Aunty Miriam Rose says, you cannot hurry the river. You must go with its flow.
Go with its flow and understand its ways. And that's what it's about, is understanding the ways of people, all the different rivers that flow, and just going to that place of deep understanding.
Well, I think we can all learn from and benefit from slowing down in today's world, right? But back to your point about the 7 steps, I do want to give you an opportunity to share with us, run through what those 7 steps are, so that people just get at least a top level view about those things. And then I do want to come back and just complete on asking you about what it takes to have this happen. And I know you've mentioned the word brave, so I do want to come back after hearing about these 7 steps, about, you know, why do we think that it takes, you know, courage, or what is the bravery?
So step 1 is reconciliation, and that's where we explore the 1 in 30, but we introduce a simple 3-step framework for reconciliation and allyship, and that's reflect, relate, reconcile. So you can use this in a difficult conversation. Reflect what's at the heart of the matter. Relate, put yourself in the other person's shoes, and reconcile, find a way forward together. And it's amazing how popular that framework has been. I think it lies in its simplicity. Step 2 is we look at identity, what's common to identity, which is indigeneity and connection to country and kinship. And then what's different, and we look how diverse Aboriginal Australia is, and protocols and stereotypes, breaking them down. Step 3, we look at the impact of history and the impact of transgenerational trauma, but we also look at the positive side of 100,000 years of Indigenous wisdom and what we can draw from that. Step 4 we mentioned is unconscious bias, cultural baggage, and communication strategies. Step 5, we look at kinship and again, the values of the insights and values of kinship and how we can apply them.
And the strengths.
Strengths.
Yeah. And how that can apply in the workplace as well, what the workplace can learn about belonging from Aboriginal kinship.
Step 6, we look at the gap between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people in Australia, and we call that the privilege gap. So we look at the role of privilege and how it has contributed to that gap. And we look at also the hard conversations around privilege. We feel these are the conversations we need to have as allies about acknowledging our privilege and acknowledging racism in all its different forms. And then step 7 is the big pulling it all together into allyship and, you know, tips for being an ally and how you can be an ally. And we always invite people to commit to just one action for allyship in any interaction that we have. So we say, okay, so we will ask you that of you, Kylie. From today, what is one simple thing you can do as an ally, and that you will do as an ally?
Well, that's a great question, because one of the things I was going to be asking you is, what is the one thing that I could do to help you know, create a movement around the importance of the work that you're doing? Because for me, what I can see is and certainly my commitment here is to be able to make this more accessible in a bigger scale as much as possible, because I do think that sometimes we can put these conversations into a category of diversity and inclusion. And just to be frank, from my point of view, I think that's very limiting and limited in the way that it's viewed, because that just kind of says it belongs in a certain place, when in fact, if we look at, and my background, if I look at really just at organizations overall, they are a microcosm of relationships. And so, I think having a conversation like this, taking it out of that paradigm and making it more accessible across the board, suggesting that this is not just about our connection or support of First Nations people. That's the foundation, absolutely, and it's how we live and work with them. But how do we actually? I'm really interested in how can we tap into this wisdom from our own backyard, because there are many organisations that I know would be screaming that this is an area that is not doing so well. I mean, there's a lot of talk in organisations about companies not aligning with my values. Now we're talking about the Great Resignation and people leaving jobs and because they're not satisfied. But if we look at those relationships, it's all off the back of a relationship. So I think there's more work to be done. I'm interested in how we can get you more allies. Is my question. How can I become more of an ally to help facilitate the conversation? But at the same time, how can we get you more allies? Because I think there's a lot to be gained. In fact, one of the questions I did want to come back to you about, Aunty Munya, was, which I know we will get to the brave conversation, is you did say that there is a benefit for the organisation to learn about belonging. Could you articulate for us what are you seeing is the benefit to them in understanding, having that appreciation of belonging?
Well, a lot of people again feel isolated at work and feel like they don't belong. So it's about, I think when people feel that they belong, they contribute better. They're more encouraged to participate more, and they invest more of themselves in the workplace. And we're saying you can model and structure your workplace that encourages and fosters this feeling of togetherness, if you like, but through creating these networks, supportive networks, because when people do the kinship system with us, they see it as this huge mandala, this spider web, if you like, of connections, but each one is a support string or rope, if you like, that holds people in place. So it's about creating that feeling of safety and security at work, and especially people feeling invested in the workplace, being able to offer more. Would you say, Carla?
Yeah, definitely. Often we work. We do just that kinship workshop with if we have senior executives, for example, and we only have an hour and a half with them, that's what we do, that belonging and inclusion workshop based on the kinship system. And I think you raised some really great points, Kylie, and I've got a bit frustrated at times. People think they're looking for cultural awareness training, and sometimes we have to call it that because that's what they think they're looking for, but really it's allyship training, and it's training that's about self-discovery and that you can apply to all relationships, as you say. So, and there's so much to learn from Indigenous wisdom. I mean, we ran a program once about what leaders could learn from Indigenous wisdom, and when we first advertised that, we had so many people coming to us thinking that it was for Aboriginal staff, teaching them leadership skills, and it's like, oh, so missing the point.
So given that we have some airtime here, could you share with me, what can leaders learn from Indigenous wisdom?
So much. I mean, firstly,
where does one start?
Yeah, where does one start?
I think, first of all, this notion, get away with this notion of a hierarchy of leadership. It's all about parabolic leadership. And parabolic leadership, if you want to think, a friend of us that teaches it, is about like an umbrella. If you looked at it from above as an umbrella, and it's bent over the spoke, there's one, the leadership is one, but that's the handle. But it fans out, and all input goes back to the fulcrum, if you like, that you're holding on to the idea that leadership is spread among everyone in that organization.
So it's a flat structure, and it's like a web. And like the web, the mandala, the web that we use to teach kinship, the particular kinship structure we teach as an example, it is a web, and people come in and out to the center of the hub of leadership as needed. So I think but everyone in that web is valued. Everyone has something to contribute. Everyone has a role and is clear on that role, and know that they belong. So I think, and then otherwise for leaders, it's looking at practices of Dediri, looking at self-reflection and how you apply that, looking at the different relationships with time and listening and silence. And so,
and it's group-centered. It's going away from the ego. It's not ego-centered. It's group-centered leadership, where you go at things all the time with a group mentality. What is best for the group, rather than what is best for me, the personal interest. It's all about group interest over personal interest.
So it's quite radically different from the system we operate in.
But you're speaking my language, and I think it was actually the reason why I started this podcast, was my commitment to interrupt, whether we say interrupt, disrupt, change, etc. Having been raised in a model that was the hierarchy, and the only way to express leadership is if you took that pathway, and then realizing after having 3 children that just was ineffective, because I couldn't manage having a family and manage having a life and all at the same time. But I'm not just a huge advocate, but the work that I do in organizations is to help organizations be better at spreading. It doesn't belong at the top. Everybody has a say, everybody has a contribution. So I'm really it's just extraordinary timing that you're doing the work that you're doing, and I think it's much needed. And I'm sure there's an absolute call out in the industry for, and I think that you're the most appropriately represented to be able to effectively do that. So I'm very grateful for that analogy that you were saying, and very interested in that. So we are towards the end of the interview, and I would like to just complete on, I know you've mentioned the word brave, and I do think anything's a courageous act when we're sharing and taking a new leap into the world. But from your point of view, what does that braveness look like?
Well, it looks, firstly, I guess it's vulnerability. And I've mentioned a quote this morning from Brene Brown, about courage being firstly the act of showing up. And the theme of NAIDOC this year so the theme of Reconciliation Week is being brave and taking action. And the theme of NAIDOC is stand up, show up, and get up. So just having the vulnerability to show up, that's a big part of bravery.
Yes.
For me, another quote that I love, one of my favorite quotes from Marianne Radmacher is, courage is not the lion that roars, it's the little voice that gets up every morning and says, I'll try again. So for me, there's something around consistency and just taking these actions every day. The other thing is, it's 5 key tips we teach around allyship, and one is, it's about listening and doing your homework and speaking up, but not over someone. And also another big thing is it's all about action, but learning from your mistakes. So being brave as an ally is being prepared to take action, but then to reflect and learn from your mistakes. And I have found the Aboriginal people and communities so forgiving. Of my career is built on mistakes. And it's about your impact. The other thing about allyship, it's about your impact. It's not about your intent. So how sometimes you hear people say, oh, as long as your intent's okay, that's fine. Not with allyship. if you've got to be willing to reflect on your impact and to get feedback from Aboriginal people or whoever you're being an ally to about the impact of your actions, and then to take ownership for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for me, being brave is all about like being the fool in the tarot. Just take your foot off the cliff and just go off and see where it goes. Like the Buddha said, throw yourself into the river of life. Same. It's all the same, but it's taking that first step.
So I will complete then on one question about that. What is the one brave thing that I or we as listeners could do from today?
I think one brave thing is just do something. Like you've got to find for yourself what that is. We can't tell you what that is.
Right.
But to commit to doing something and just saying, and to commit, make it, I'm going to do this by such and such a time, really, and do it. So when we invite people to commit to an action, we invite them, if they want to, they can give us their email and we'll write to them in a month's time and say, hey, you said you were going to do that. How are you going with it? So it's about that accountability as well. What would you say, Aunty Munya?
It's I think for me, language has a lot to do it. Like learn how to say hello in an Aboriginal language, then just start practicing it and go from there, and then eventually learn the whole language. But start with hello. That's a good.
Thank you for making that simple and practical. My motto this morning in waking up was just to put one step in front of the other, and I can see even for myself that one in particular is the first step, because I've even noticed that, I tend to look from a bigger place, in terms of what is there to learn specifically about the language. And so so here's my promise, is to learn the language of hello. So that gives me one step forward before I take the next one. For our listeners, I invite you to do the same. Look for yourself. And I really love that you said you often, you don't give, you ask people to do the looking, because I really do think that allows us to do the thinking and the discovery for ourselves. So I invite you today to really do the thinking for yourself about what is the one thing you can do today, for hearing, Aunty Munya and Carla share about the work that they're doing, and not only from what you can do to bring greater awareness and, connection to country and our First Nations people, but also for the strength and value of your relationships and embracing the wisdom that we do have in our own backyard to be able to impact relationships. So thank you so much for the time that you've invested today in sharing what you have. I mean, really, for me, this has only just been the tip of the iceberg. I know there is just such a mountain of wealth of knowledge and wisdom that could be shared and that we could talk about. And in fact, we could talk for days. So what I will do, though, is invite people to go and pick up a copy of your book, Practical Reconciliation currently, but will be rewritten to allyship. And also Aunty Munya Andrew's book, which I have found fascinating also, is The Journey into Dreamtime, which I highly recommend. In fact, if you've not read either one of these books, please go do yourself a favor. The Journey into Dreamtime is an incredible awareness around some really valuable cultural values of Indigenous First Nations people. So thank you again, Carla and Aunty Munya. Really thank you for your time and your contribution and sharing your wisdom.
And thanks, Carla. And we love, we're on all the socials, and we've got Ask Auntie, Ask an Ally. So please connect with us, because we love to continue yarning with people. And
yes.
And
where is the best place for people to connect with you?
Well, our website is evolve with an S on the end.com.au, and we'll make sure we provide you with all those links. And then we're on Facebook, we're on LinkedIn, we're on Instagram, like all of those, whatever you're more comfortable using. But definitely our website has loads of information and all the Ask Auntie and Ask an Ally and lots of blog posts as well.
Yes.
Wonderful. Okay, so evolves, evolves.com.au.
That's the one.
Good. .au. Or any of the social channels, look for Evolves and ask them anything. Thanks again, ladies.
Thanks. Big SO. Thank you.